Good morning, everybody, and thank you for bearing with us. In the last 48 hours, we have heard a lot about the rape gang scandal and about a national inquiry. And what I want to do this morning is bring some light where there's been a lot of heat. What we haven't heard very much of is the survivors' views. Survivors and their families have gone through hell to get here, and I think that they've been ignored for far too long. So what this morning is about is not the politics, but giving them a platform to say what they want to see from a national inquiry. And I'll start by saying how much we welcome Baroness Casey's report and the recommendation for a national inquiry. This is something that we've been very vocal on in the House of Commons, and we're really glad that we finally got to this place. And I think it's important to reiterate why we want a national inquiry. It's not just because we believe this is still ongoing. It is because so much activity has taken place. 2014, 2015, 2018, local inquiries, investigations launched by the Home Office, independent reports, independent inquiries, a gangs task force as recently as 2023, finding about 807 perpetrators and 4,000 victims just last year. This is what made me decide that a national inquiry was critical, that no one has joined the dots, that the scale of this is much bigger than any of us envisaged, even as we were looking at this. And we need a national inquiry and criminal investigations, not just to look at the perpetrators, but where there was institutional failure. This is work that has not been done. Chris is going to talk about the elements that we believe are needed in order to make the inquiry a success. But most importantly, I want to hear today from the survivors and their families. And I will introduce them one by one. Very much to my left, we have Lucia, who has been a campaigner and an advocate for survivors. She's been a great help, a great voice for many people who haven't been able to speak for themselves. So Lucia is speaking as a campaigner and an advocate. She has been a campaigner and an advocate for Teresa Smith. Teresa's son was abused and very sadly has since passed away. She is pursuing justice for her son. So she will be speaking without prejudice because there is a live court case, I believe, on this issue. So she will be speaking without prejudice to that court case. But she also wants to talk about how it's not just girls who are abused, but boys. That's something that isn't spoken about enough. Fiona is a brave survivor who I spoke to last month. We had a good interview, but what's really special about what she did was waiving her anonymity. It's very difficult for a lot of people to come out and speak about what happened. And Fiona, you've been unbelievably brave. Many people would have seen the interviews you've given on so many news channels. I think you were on Newsnight just last night. So thank you for doing that. You're incredibly brave. And finally, Marlon West. Marlon is the father of Scarlett, who is also a survivor. And he spoke to me about the horrific experience he had as a parent trying to intervene and was not listened to by the authorities. He is more than a concerned father. He has been a lead campaigner for a national inquiry. So why don't I start with you, Marlon? What do you want to see from an inquiry?
So, again, I think there's more questions than answers, even after Yvette Cooper discussed the inquiry yesterday. One of my main concerns is around locally led inquiry. So if that's locally led, are we back to the same argument that local authorities are going to be questioning, they're going to be answering their own homework? One of my major concerns throughout this, don't get me wrong, I'm really angry with the groomers, but what I am angry with is the social workers and the police, the ones who didn't protect her, the ones what I was screaming at, asking them to support me, because I held my hands up. It was so difficult at the time that I couldn't look after my own daughter. I was a single parent on my own, and social services got me suspended from work for trying to keep my daughter in the house. It was so difficult. So one of my big things out of this inquiry is about holding professionals accountable. And that doesn't reassure me one little bit. Also, the other thing what Yvette was saying is criminal prosecutions for under 16s. So Scarlett was groomed from 14 to 18. From 16 to 18 was possibly the worst time where she was being really trafficked around the country. So from 16 to 18, does that not matter? There's not going to be any prosecutions around that, because what people don't understand is the groomers, it might start off with one groomer, but by the end of it, it's a completely different grooming gang. They I guess, they sell them on to other gangs. So that really concerns me. Let's see what happens, I guess.
Thank you, Marlon. I know this is very difficult for you
to
speak about, and I'm really grateful that you're here just making sure that Scarlett and so many other girls like her just have a voice. So thank you.
Just the final one. I speak to a lot of survivors all over the country. I speak to a lot of parents. They have no trust in the police or social services. For example, with Scarlett's in the Baird Review, which was an investigation into the handling of how women, their words, women and girls are treated. My argument is it should have been women and children. Scarlett's a child in that. She was strip searched after being missing for 2 weeks and being systematically raped. And that was done as a punishment to stop her from going missing. There was no sexual gratification within that. So how are these girls going to come forward?
I think that's a really good point. And it's something, I think, Fiona, that you've also talked about as well, just that trust and encouraging so many survivors to come forward. Do you want to tell us what you would like to see from an inquiry?
Yes, so firstly, I wanted to say that I think all the political stuff needs to be put aside now. This needs to be focused on survivors, and the government need to do a lot of work to rebuild up trust from services and for the victims to be able to trust to come forward, to be able to open up and be able to engage in an inquiry, because without the engagement then we're just not going to get anywhere. So that is the responsibility now of the government to be putting active stuff in place now to fix things that are bridges that have been broken through systematic failures for years and years. Then I do also want to talk about the fact that while this inquiry is ongoing, I think it is important to acknowledge that work cannot stop on tackling the crime in the here and now. And I would encourage there to be some conversations about survivor-led education within schools and services, so we can start tackling and preventing this crime from happening while the inquiry is ongoing. We need to be addressing both sides of this issue. There is a responsibility to fix damage that has been done to so many people across the country, but there is also a responsibility to protect future people, and we shouldn't be choosing either or either. We need to be focusing on both of it. And I would encourage victims to come forward, because even though we have been failed so majorly for so long, together we can do this. We can make a difference. Without people speaking up and suffering in silence, things will never change, and people hopefully can have the courage to start speaking up and coming forward and fighting for their own justice.
Thank you, Fiona. I know this is not easy, and I'm really grateful for what you are doing today. I know you're particularly concerned about delays, and this was because you had to wait quite a while for your case. So when you make the point about things happening alongside, can you just go into a bit more detail about what specifically you mean? Because you told me a bit more.
So I think it's important to be educating children, not just on how to spot the warning signs of becoming a victim, but also on how to spot the warning signs of the criminal exploitation from the men that are grooming other young children to become groomers. We need to be focusing on the whole picture, and that needs to be going on alongside convictions, and there needs to be support put in place for people throughout all this process. People are too often left on their own, and it's a lot for any one person to deal with. During my trial, my hair fell out and I ended up having to walk around bald because of the stress it put me through and the fact that I couldn't have no help or support during that time, and people had to come and take pictures of my bald head to be put into the court documents and stuff like that, and there wasn't enough support there to help people through this process. It is such a traumatic experience, and there needs to be a lot of look at that situation going forward.
Thank you, Fiona. And once again, I have to say just how brave you are to tell this story, because many people don't understand how the trauma continues much long after the incidents themselves. So I'm very grateful, and these are some of the things that we will continue to push for to make sure that the inquiry looks at the whole picture. Teresa,
yeah,
could you tell us what you would like to see from an inquiry and a little bit about your background and how you've come to be here?
I'd like openness, transparency. I'd like more help for the survivors because there's nothing there, and more help for the families of survivors because we're just left with nothing. We're here to pick up the pieces and we're left with no support. And a lot of people don't think that parents should even be involved. But in my case, my son isn't here to represent himself. And what kind of mother would I be if I didn't, you know, be here and carry on the fight for him? He was just 13 when the abuse started. It was a paedophile ring. I did tell the social workers and the police, and basically I was told, if you don't stop digging and, you know, rooting around for the evidence, that my child would suffer the consequences because he was in the care system voluntary. He got abused, and he, as an adult, then he went to the police, reported it, and sadly he died in the meantime in 2021. He died, and I've had to pick up the pieces, but it took 10 years from the start to a court, and we go in January to court and for the hearing of just one abuser, because he was ready to name the other abusers, but sadly his police officer was on holiday, he was dealing with it, and she said, when I come off holiday I'll come and see him, we'll do some more video evidence. But when she come back, he died. So
I know that you're worried that justice won't fully be done, and we'll do all that we can to support you.
Yeah.
You also said that you were concerned about perpetrators fleeing.
Right.
Do you want to say more about that?
Yeah. He's fled once during the inquiry into him, and when they arrested him, the police gave 7 recommendations to the judge, who one was to take his passport. The only recommendation they went with, the judge, was for him to live and sleep at a certain property. Now, this is a man that's fled once, and I do believe he is going to get a fake passport and flee the country again. I have informed the police, but they say, well, we're doing all we can, but it's not enough. And it's not enough that this inquiries and stuff is all about girls, because it's not just girls, and boys need to come forward. Lots of boys need to come forward, because I know it's happening. And it's not a thing that they have to be embarrassed about. They have to come forward, and it's not their fault.
Thank you very much, Teresa. And finally, Lucia.
Yeah, a lot of the work we've been doing and concerned around has been the lack of openness and transparency from this, and we're hoping this inquiry will give regular updates to restore the public trust and survivors' trust, more importantly, because we do believe that's at an all-time low. These survivors have been let down far too many times and we've got to see real change with this inquiry now. We also want to see that it has the powers to refer new findings of new information that's brought forward, so that the inquiry itself can go to the police with those matters, and for it to liaise with the judicial system, because we want cases dealt with in a timely manner. Only last week, a local charity, COGS, in Manchester, Keeping Our Girls Safe, they took a survivor to the police. It took her years to get to this point that she wanted to go to the police, and she come forward to be told that she probably won't get a court hearing until 2028. So they live these experiences, and they're living and breathing it every day. It becomes their life, it becomes their being, and to finally get to that point where you want to come forward, to be told you've got years of waiting, and then we want to see a uniformed approach by the judges as well. We want to see the inquiry have that written in, that sentences are fitting, they're appropriate, because we've seen too many cases where we don't believe these sentences are fitting. And yeah, so we've just been more concerned around things like that, haven't we, Teresa?
Yeah,
Lucia, when we had the roundtable a few weeks back, you also talked about, I think you told me some stories about how the state failure was very blatant. I don't know if you recall the specific incident. Is it something that you might want to share? Because we want to make sure that the inquiry isn't just about perpetrators, but the full suite of institutions that might have let people down.
Yeah, there's a survivor that we're working with, and she's just been repeatedly let down by authorities. Her records go missing. She gets gaslit to an extreme where you think they can't be making survivors feel like they've gone crazy. They know what happened to them. They know their records, that they reported things. There's the NHS records go, and there's nobody bringing all this together to make sure that everything can be centralised and that survivors' information is kept safe.
Understood. Teresa, you had a similar experience as well with missing records and case files and so on.
Yeah, I've got some of my son's records, not all of them, and I know that some's missing. They've said that they'll give them to the solicitor, but the solicitor mustn't show me. But that's my child. I should be able to see what they've done with him, because they're now saying that there's no signs of him being groomed. Oldham Council are saying.
It was mentioned in my serious case review as well that big chunks of my care records were missing. I was a looked after child. There should have been a documentation for near enough every day that I was in care, whether it just be an acknowledgement of me going to school or waking up or anything that I did. But she found that there was months at a time where there was just not a single documentation within my records. So that seems to be common within a lot of cases, is missing records.
Right. And Marlon, did you want to add to that?
So unfortunately for Scarlett, she's not even got to any kind of full criminal investigation. We've been pushing for this for years, even though she's also been into care due to child sexual exploitation. Great Manchester Police haven't investigated it until the Channel 4 documentary. So they opened the investigation 4 weeks before that. What I find absolutely disgraceful is the only reason why we've got this case open is because of the media attention. What about the thousands of other survivors out there where no prosecutions? A lot of these girls that I'm speaking to, and this is common, there's no prosecutions at all.
I had to fight for mine. I didn't get mine willingly. I had to fight tooth and nail and expose people on the media just to get an investigation started. Mine had been documented and reported from 2008, and the serious case review noted 7 instances of assault, sexual assault or rape that were not investigated, and I had the police turn up in 2013 due to finding my name on a checklist in a perpetrator's house in relation to a different case, and they still didn't investigate when I told them everything then. So it took me exposing it to the media to get my case investigated in 2014, which led to prosecutions in 2019.
That's just unbelievable. And Lucia, I believe you had one more thing?
Yeah, I just wanted to add into that we hope the inquiry would include some sort of specialised monitoring team, because we want someone to be dedicated to following up any recommendations that the inquiry finds, that they can feed back centrally and report back who locally hasn't been complying, because we find these local authorities, like you said, they're marking their own homework, and it's just that has got to change, and we need them to be accountable further up the ladder there, because this inquiry's got to create change, it's got to force change.
Thank you very much. And just before we go to media questions, I'm going to bring in Shadow Home Secretary Chris Phil, who has done a lot of work in this area and has set tests which we are going to have to make sure that the inquiry is successful and swift as well. Chris.
Thank you, Kemi. Well, look, just firstly, Marlon, Fiona, Teresa and Lucia, just to echo what Kemi said, thank you for your courage in fighting for the truth to come out. I know it's taken years and years. I know your lives have been ruined by the appalling abuse that happened. So just thank you for having the fortitude and the bravery to speak out on behalf of hundreds, and I think we think, in fact, thousands of young girls and boys as well who were abused. So thank you for what you've done by bringing this to public attention in the way you have. One of the things that struck me about this scandal isn't just that it happened in the first place, that the abuse occurred, and it's not just that the authorities were negligent and didn't investigate properly. It's that they deliberately and intentionally covered up these crimes. And I think actually Teresa touched on this when you said the police officers actually told you to stop complaining. They told you to leave it alone. And they said your son would suffer consequences unless you just stayed quiet. And yeah, exactly. And I've heard that so many times. I've heard about parents getting arrested for complaining. A case of a senior police officer in a northern city, a superintendent who ordered a retired officer who was working for a charity at the time to stop investigating because he was worried about so-called community tensions. So they deliberately covered this up. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't just negligence, it was deliberate. So the first thing I think this inquiry must do is make sure the people who are responsible for covering this up, police officers, local council leaders and councillors, social services, even the Crown Prosecution Service in some cases, are held responsible. There's a criminal offence called misconduct in public office. In my view, many of these people that covered this up are guilty of that offence. They need to be prosecuted and, frankly, sent to prison. And that needs to happen, in my view, alongside the inquiry. It can't wait until afterwards. And, of course, at the same time, the many perpetrators, as Fiona said, who have escaped justice, need to be sent to prison and prosecuted as well. So I think that's the first thing, prosecuting those that covered this up for misconduct in public office. I think, secondly, we need to make sure this inquiry covers all 50 towns affected, not just some of them, but all of them. We know some towns like Bradford have refused to cooperate with any inquiry at all, even to this day, so all those places must be covered. All of the local inquiries must have statutory powers to compel the production of evidence, so the cover-up can't continue. This must be done in a timely way, so 2 years is as long as it should take. We can't have this dragging on for years and years. The survivors and their families have been suffering for long enough. And then critically, to Marlon's point, this needs to be done in a way that is genuinely independent. Councils like Bradford are still refusing to look at this. We can't trust those councils who have been covering this up actively for so many years to investigate themselves. It has to be independently led. They can't investigate themselves. The inquiry has to look at the role of ethnicity in the cover-up. Casey found that. And then finally, this needs to start soon. We need to see the terms of reference and a chair appointed by the summer recess, which is towards the end of July, about 4 or 5 weeks' time. And we need, as both Fiona and Lucia have said, we need survivors to be at the heart of this. They need to be consulted the whole time about how this inquiry is conducted and kept regularly updated. This has to be really driven by the survivors, not just imposed by central government. And those are the tests we're going to be holding the government to account for to make sure they actually do these things. And I think, listening to what I've heard said this morning, I think we're probably all on the same page when it comes to those principles.